All right, hey everybody. I'm going to do a lesson today on lunar phases, explain why we see the moon and why the moon changes shape throughout the course of the month. All right, so this is a very good animation that I'm going to walk you through. Let's first pay attention to where the sun is. Anytime you're given a new diagram that's representing lunar phases, you should always look where the light's coming from, because that could change the location of what's called the new moon or the full moon. And if you interpret it wrong, you could get all the positions or the phases incorrect. So whenever the moon's in the middle, that means between sun and earth, is when the lit side of the moon is facing the sun, which means none of the lighted side of the moon is visible to this observer here on earth. So when we look up, we see no moon. Instead of saying no moon, we call it the new moon. And that goes back to an ancient belief that the moon had a life cycle, that the moon was born every month, it grew to full, and then it died, and then listen how I'm going to word it, and then it was born anew, hence the new moon. So every month the moon had a life cycle. And actually that's where the word month got its name. So it takes a month, approximately a month, to go through all the lunar phases. And almost all the world's first calendars, whether they're ancient cultures or religions, are based on the moon's cycle of phases. Okay? So where the moon is right now is a new moon, because the dark side of the moon's facing Earth and we don't see any of it. If I was calling it or giving it a name, I would call it no moon. All right? But we call it the new moon. Now, I want you to pay attention to the fact that half of the moon is always lit and half of the Earth is always lit. That's true for every object in our solar system that is facing our sun. The side that's facing the sun, half of that is lit and the other half is in darkness. Okay? Now, what's going to happen is the moon isn't staying still. It's orbiting or revolving around the Earth. And as it goes around, different portions of that lit half will then become visible to us here on Earth, which allows different shapes of the moon to be seen. And we call those shapes phases. So I'm going to play this animation. I taped it a while ago, but I think I remember where I paused it here and there. Unfortunately, this is a flash, and at the end of last year, Chromebook doesn't support it anymore. But hopefully some of these animations will become available soon. All right. So the animation is going to run. So the moon starts to move in its orbit. All right. As it moves, we rotate around the Earth. Okay, they stopped it right there. I'm going to pause it as well. Oh, let me pause it. Go back a little bit. There we go. So when the moon is here, an observer on Earth is only able to see this tiny little slice that's lit. Okay? And that is what the moon's going to look like. We call it the waxing crescent. Okay? Now, crescent, a lot of you probably know the nice, tasty French pastry, croissant. That's the shape. Okay? So if you were taking this in French class, you would call this the waxing croissant. All right? The English word for croissant is crescent. So when the moon kind of looks like a banana, we call it the crescent. Now, if it's waxing means growing. So if the moon's growing every night, instead of saying a growing moon, we call it a waxing moon. Now, how in the world would you know? If you see the moon lit up on the right side, all right, I want you all to think of right returning. So if the right side of the moon is lit, the moon is returning to full. So anytime you see the moon lit on the right, it's waxing, which means it's going to be growing night to night. So since this side, the crescent's on the right side, we call this a waxing crescent. It's going to continue to grow All right, when it gets to here, it's made a quarter of the turn around the Earth. So we call it the first quarter. Now, a normal observer may actually refer to this as a half moon, which I definitely understand because it looks like you're seeing a half moon. But really what you're seeing is half of a half. So you're seeing a quarter. So that's another reason why we call it the quarter moon. Actually, when you see the full moon, you're only seeing the lit half. So when you see the full moon, you're actually seeing half the moon. But for some reason, when we see the full moon, we don't get too technical. And we still call it a full moon. But for the quarter moon, we get a little scientific or mathematical. All right. And instead of saying a half moon, we call it the quarter moon. We call this the first quarter. If you wanted to call it the waxing quarter, I would not mark that incorrect. That's showing me you understand the concept that it's growing, or the right side is what we see, and it's a quarter phase. Okay. All right, now it's going to continue to grow. Right now it's bigger than half, but less than full. We refer to this shape as the gibbous. The gibbous, I think it's in Latin, means hunched back. So the moon literally looks like it has a hunched back. Okay. But since the right is still lit and not the left, we call it the waxing gibbous. All right, let's continue. After the waxing gibbous, it's going to grow to full. All right, so here it is as the full moon. This time, the order of the objects in space are sun, earth, moon. All right, and this is your full moon. So when earth is in the middle, the lighted half of the moon is facing the earth, and we're able to see the entire lighted half. So we see the whole lighted side, so we call it a full moon. Remember, the whole thing takes about a month. So we just went halfway around. That's about half a month or 2 weeks, or look here, 14 days. Okay. Now, can the moon get any more full than full? No, it cannot. So once it reaches full, it's got to start shrinking. And it's not going to shrink and disappear immediately. It's got to slowly shrink. And instead of saying a shrinking moon, we call that a waning moon. Okay. So here we go. So now it's the same names, but this time it's the left that's lit. And if the left is lit, everyone say left, left, leaving. So if the left is lit, the moon is leaving. All right. Remember, if the right is lit, it's returning to full. So if the left is lit, it's leaving, which means it's disappearing or shrinking or fading away. And the technical term we use for that is waning. So this is the same shape. It's bigger than half, but less than full. So we call that the gibbous. But this time, since we see it on the left, we call it the waning gibbous. All right. So it's going to keep on orbiting. Now it got to here. All right. So the moon, remember, started right here between Earth and the sun. So it's went 3/4 of the way around. It has done 3/4 of a lap. So hence the third quarter. All right. Sometimes you see this referred to as the last quarter as well. I would accept either answer. Or if you were paying attention earlier, you could call it the waning quarter because the left is lit. So it's leaving. Therefore it's waning. All right. So this is 3/4 of a month. About 21 days. See, 22 days, 7 days in a week. All right. Okay. Now, Here's the last phase before it's reborn. So this is the crescent again, right? It looks like a croissant, but now the crescent is on the left side. So instead of calling it a waxing crescent like we had earlier, we call this the waning crescent. All right. And then the moon totally disappears after this. And then it's reborn anew. Okay? And its cycle starts all over again. And you can see it works like clockwork. It's very predictable. And now it makes sense why ancient peoples, and still two big religions, Judaism and Islam, still use this to mark a lot of their holidays. Okay? And they use a lunar calendar. So we will spend a lot more time learning about this. Okay, I hope you enjoyed the animation. Okay, and play it again if you're confused, and I'll see you soon.